I have a voice and I will be heard.
I have a voice, I will be heard.
I have a voice, I will be heard. I have a voice and I will be heard.
Hi, my name is Aileen Qualander, and it is my great honor to introduce to you this year's keynote speaker, Mr. David Seidler. Mr. Seidler has won an Academy Award, an Orange British Academy Film Award, and a Critics' Choice Movie Award for Best Original Screenplay with his work, The King's Speech. The King's Speech was also nominated for 12 Academy Awards and 7 Orange British Academy Film Awards. Growing up listening to King George VI on the radio, Mr. Seidler used the king as a source of hope with his own stuttering, especially as he moved to New York from London at a very young age. He knew that someday he would want to write something about the king, but was never sure exactly what. I had the privilege to meet Mr. Seidler at the premiere in New York City this past November, and I was so overwhelmed by how exactly the movie had captured a stutterer's struggle and triumph without making them look dumb or belittling them. And prodded by my speech therapist, Lee, I had to approach him to tell him how much I loved his work, and long story short, he became this year's keynote speaker. Mr. Seidler's work, The King's Speech, has shown me that us stutterers can accomplish anything we want to, and we shouldn't let stuttering hold us back, because it's only a small part of us, which is an important message to me, especially as I begin college this August. So, Mr. Seidler.
Well, you're all a very hard act to follow. And you may succeed in reducing me to tears, because I find it very, very moving. So if I start to blubber at some point, just bear with me. My name is David Seidler. I'm a stutterer, and I'm proud of it. You'll excuse me if I occasionally refer to my notes. Somebody asked me 2 weeks ago at Fort Worth whether I was nervous about giving speeches at this stage. And my honest reply was not about stuttering. That doesn't faze me. I don't do it very often, and if I do, I really don't care. My concern is getting up here and absolutely going blank and asking you to talk amongst yourselves, you see. I tried to think about what on earth I could say to you. It's difficult because most of you are stutterers, or your parents of stutterers, siblings of stutterers, or your speech therapists. So you all know as much, if not a great deal more than I do. So I, considering that, thought, what on earth can I talk to you about? Not just about writing the King's Speech, because that doesn't qualify me. That just qualifies me of being a very lucky person. And then I realized that what I did want to talk about is my journey through stuttering. As you'll realize from the King's Speech, I am very fond of titles with double meanings. The King's Speech is about a speech the king has to give. It's also about the King's Speech. My journey through stuttering is also got one of those double meanings. My journey through stuttering, it is my journey through trying to get some degree of control over my speech, but it is also the journey I have made through being a stutterer. And I think you all understand that very, very well, better than I do. Trying to recall and remember my journey was not easy. It was something I was forced to do by writing the King's Speech, of course, and working with Colin Firth. It's not easy because the way I can explain this to my non-stuttering friends is this. It's somewhat like a toothache. When you have a toothache, all you're thinking about is that toothache. Wow, it hurts. Oh, it hurts. I wish it would stop hurting. You get to the dentist, he fixes it up, the pain goes away. The last thing you want to do is remember that pain. You just go home and you forget about it. And that's very much what happened to me with my stuttering experience. Once it was over, it was not something I particularly wanted to think about anymore. But I have been, fortunately, forced to do so. So let me first walk you through my experiences as a stutterer. That's really all I can do. And for those of you who were at Fort Worth at NSA, which I discovered was not the National Space Agency, I apologize if you have heard a lot of this before, but I've only had one life and one stutter, and that's all I can talk about. My third year was not a particularly good year. My very, very first memory, it's just shortly before my third birthday. We were living in Lingfield in Surrey, near the British coast, because war had already started. My parents wanted to get out of London. Rather a good thing they did, because a few weeks later an incendiary bomb went through the roof of what had been my room. So it was good that we were in the country. And my father and his brother, my Uncle Zygmunt, had built a sandbox for me. And they were painting the sandbox, and I was helping them by splashing paint around. And I could hear this distant thump, thump, thump. And I asked, "What's that?" And they said, oh, that's a storm. Well, of course, they were rather bad liars, because even at 3, I knew it was a perfectly clear day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. So it wasn't a storm. I later was told that it was the guns of Dunkirk. So that was my first memory. And my life then changed very, very quickly. Like so many children of British middle class in that era, I had seen very little of my parents, very little of my mother. I was brought up by a nanny, which is not a terrible thing, may I say, if you have a good nanny. And I had a wonderful nanny. Her name was Adelaide. She was a beautiful, pleasant-faced girl. I can just remember her with a cascade of hair. And one night, she kissed me goodnight, and she said rather wistfully, "David, I'll always be there for you." Gets me still. The next morning, she was gone. She had had to go home to her family because of war. But I was from a family that didn't explain things to children, so all I knew was that she was gone. And the next thing I remember, I was on a boat coming to the United States. And there was a lot of excitement in the air. We were a convoy of 3 ships, 2 filled with families such as myself, such as mine, and 1 filled with Italian prisoners of war who were being transported to Canada to get them out of England so they didn't riot in their prisoner of war camps when the Germans invaded, which was considered absolutely imminent. And we were being dogged by submarines, and the men on the ship had been dragooned into submarine watch service. That included my father. And one night, all the bells were ringing, and my father had sighted a submarine. Only it was a whale. So he wasn't on submarine patrol anymore. But that kind of excitement leaves a memory. One of the ships was sunk. It was the Italian prisoners of war, and they were locked in the hold, and they all perished. A terrible tragedy that nobody talks about today. My next memory was the Statue of Liberty in New York. And I've got to tell you, it's the classic immigrant's memory, and it does bond you to a country that takes you in. We went off to Long Island. We lived in Seacliff first, and I managed to wander away from the house. I don't know how I got out of the sight of my parents, but I did, and I was walking through the streets, and I got picked up by the police, who undoubtedly saw this little kid sort of standing there dazed, not knowing where he was. My parents were located fairly quickly. It was a small town, America, and news of a British family living there was pretty exotic. So very quickly, my parents showed up at the police station. I was fine. I was sitting on the cop's desk. I had a police hat on my head, which was sort of coming down around my eyes. They had given me an ice cream cone, and so I was sitting there with a cap on, ice cream cone, and I was telling them the most outrageous stories about the war, the bombs going bang, 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 and I was a writer even then, you see. My next memories are we moved to Great Neck, and I was stuttering. I had, by the time we got to New York City, just at my 3rd birthday, I was stuttering. The war years in Great Neck, I was certainly stuttering. It didn't affect me too badly. I don't remember being bullied. I just remembered that, yes, I stuttered. I had some friends, and I didn't stutter much with them. Then we went back to England right at the end of the war. Literally, we were on the first ship that had civilians that crossed the Atlantic. We arrived in Liverpool on VJ Day. And these were tough years, and I really began to know something is terribly wrong. I wasn't bullied because I stuttered, but I was bullied because I had spent the war years in America. I had had it soft. I was also bullied because my background is Jewish, and a little remembered fact was that at that time in 1945-46, in Palestine, the Jews were being terrorists. There was an organization called the Sten Gang, named after the Sten gun, which they used, and they were kidnapping and executing British soldiers. And so every time a British soldier got executed, I got beaten up, which didn't improve my stuttering much. I had my first speech therapist in England. Interestingly, when I think back on this, was that in very, very affluent Great Neck, Long Island, there were no speech therapists in the school, wasn't even heard of. And yet in very poor austerity England, there were speech therapists. She wasn't very good, at least I didn't think so. I didn't think she understood me or my stuttering one bit, and she smelled rather bad. That doesn't help, you know, boiled cabbage and cod doesn't go down well with a kid. I was having a great deal of difficulty responding in class. Reading was an absolute, I was about to say an agony. It wasn't an agony, it was an impossibility. I just couldn't do it. And this came home to me very clearly when, for the first time, I had an opportunity to write a story. And I wrote a story that I was extremely proud of about the journey of a penny's journey from hand to hand to the various people that get change. And I thought it was really terrific. I later realized that I had probably copied an O. Henry story word for word, but I hadn't read the O. Henry story. So anyway, I couldn't read it. And I had to plead, which was a long thing to do, of course. I had to plead with my teacher to please read the story for me. And I began to sense I was being limited terribly by my stuttering. But not completely. I was a ham bone even then. There's a thing in England called the Christmas pantomime, which is quite wonderful. These are big stage productions, usually Sinbad or one of these great stories. Lots of scantily clad chorus girls to keep Dad happy. Lots of really rude comedians to keep everybody happy. And then at halftime, inevitably, one of the members of the cast, usually a magician or a clown, gets up and calls for kids to come up, and they joke with the kids and do tricks and stuff like that. And I would always race up to the stage, you see. And often I was chosen because nice chubby little chap up there, what's your name? And then it would take me about 5 minutes to say my name, and their eyes would get wider and wider. You've all seen it. And they, oh my Lord, they would think, we've got a stutterer up there. But I was quite happy. It didn't bother me at all. I was on stage, and that was terrific. After a couple of years, we went back to Great Neck. And the stuttering was getting quite worse now. Again, there was no speech therapy. But I did have remedial education therapy. Interesting, they found money for that, but not for something like stuttering. The bullying began a little bit here. There was a young boy, but I remember his name, Mike Fahey. I think stuttering was just the trigger mechanism of that one. His parents were Irish and my parents were from England, and it seemed like a really good idea to just keep the feud going. So every day after school, Mike would wait for me faithfully and beat me up. Until my father, very thankfully, I still thank him today in my mind for this, he got me boxing lessons. And I remember the name of the coach. It was Mr. Kohler, and he had a nose that had been broken so many times it didn't know which way it was going. And he taught me that, you know, the best punch in the repertoire is the jab, and then you do your right, you see. So once I'd had enough lessons that I had a bit of confidence in that, when I came out of school and there was my good friend Michael waiting to beat me up, I whacked him. And we became the best friends. He was my bodyguard for the rest of my years in school. We were great. We would go squirrel hunting. I'm not quite sure why we went squirrel hunting, but we would go squirrel hunting together. It was great. Then came junior high school. And I don't think I have to tell anybody here that, you know, junior high school is the worst time for anybody, whether you're a stutterer or not a stutterer. It's a tough time. And here's where it really got bad. I was living in dread. The phone was my enemy. I had a great deal of trouble with the H sound, so I simply could not say hello, couldn't do that. I learned eventually to take a very deep breath and say, my name is David, and I could get that out. I couldn't read in class. I couldn't answer in class. It got to the point where in those days you had a set seat, a desk. Maybe it's still the same. And I could see the teacher working his or her way around the class. And when I knew, tomorrow it's going to be my turn, the next day I was sick and I would stay home from school. Finally, that got noticed, and I got a note excusing me from any oral response in class. Interestingly enough, the only resentment I got from that was from a fellow stutterer. And in retrospect, maybe he was right. High school, and bloody French. Conjugating verbs. I didn't know what a verb was, and I certainly couldn't conjugate it, and I certainly couldn't speak it. French was just, speaking in a foreign language was just a terror for me. May I say, even to this day, and I'm fairly fluent, as you can see, but if I go into Europe and I start speaking my very bad schoolboy French, I can still stutter to this day. I love theater. As I pointed out, I had been a ham bone right from the start. And I so wanted to be in plays, but I couldn't do it. So I was the kid who pulled the curtain. And I used to get very upset at my parents for not coming to all 5 performances to tell me how well I had pulled the curtain. Which, by the way, that's why I feel an organization such as Our Time is so wonderful. It's such a brave and empowering experience to be able to partake in theater, whether you stutter or whether you don't. Finally, speech therapy began at high school, on the high school level, a little late. I had several speech therapists that didn't seem to be particularly helpful until at last there was one who I found was very helpful because she was really cute. And that helps. You know, love and support and friendship, I think, ultimately are far greater tools than expertise in mechanical exercises. I was now 16, and this is the experience that, by the way, led to the scene in the King's Speech that got us the R rating and put us in the same ballpark as Chainsaw in 3D. In a country, by the way, where you, on the radio and television, can advertise a film called Little Fockers. The hormones were raging at 16, of course. I couldn't ask a girl out for a date. And even if I had asked her for a date, and even if she had said yes, what was the point? I couldn't talk to her. And this was the 50s, and we did talk on dates. So I got very upset, quite depressed for a little while, but I'm not a particularly depressive personality. It's just my DNA. I get very defiant and proactive. And I ended up thinking, this is wrong. There's something wrong in this picture. And I found myself in my bedroom thinking, now wait, what have I done wrong? Why have the gods visited this affliction upon me? I didn't sleep with my mother. I didn't kill my father. I've been a pretty good kid. So, and I started shouting the F word, the F-bomb word. Well, if I am stuck with this F-word affliction, F-word the rest of you, you are just F-word stuck with listening to me. By the way, I don't encourage you to walk up and down the aisles of the hotel screaming this word, but that seemed to be the trigger inside my head. It flipped a switch. Something changed. That act of defiance, that, all right, if this is my lot in life, I accept it, but everyone else is going to have to accept it too. And within 2 weeks, my stuttering just miraculously faded away. I realized day by day, whoa, I'm stuttering less. Oh, I'm not stuttering at all. I can't say that it totally vanished. I still had very great trouble with conjugating French verbs, and I couldn't read. Reading aloud was still pretty difficult for me, but speech was fine, or pretty much fine. So much so that I auditioned for the school play, and I even got a role. It was a very small role. It was in George Bernard Shaw's Androcles and the Lion, and I was a Christian being eaten by a lion in the Colosseum, but I didn't stutter as I died. I then went off to Cornell, and I had a radio show. I was a disc jockey. I did a great deal of acting, which was wonderful. You think that if you can get a real handle on your stuttering, all your problems will disappear. I've got news for you. You still have problems. I would have these awful nightmares the night before an opening performance of I'd gone on stage and everything was going splendidly, except I had forgotten to wear my trousers. I'm sure there's a deep psychological significance to this, which we don't need to go into right now. The years went by, and stuttering really was no longer an issue for me until the King's Speech. And then we had a long rehearsal period of 3 weeks, which is a very long rehearsal period for a film. Even a Broadway or West End stage production usually only has 4 weeks, so this is quite extraordinary. And Colin Firth is actually Colin's a real nuisance. How can somebody be, that intelligent, that charismatic, that good-looking, that talented, and that nice too? It's just unfair. I keep on asking Colin to do something dastardly, but he won't. Anyway, he wanted to work very closely with me. He said, "Look, you're my sauce. You wrote your story using the king, obviously, but it's your story. Tell me what it was like." And I had to tell him not only how it felt physically, what happens to the shoulders, what happens to the chest muscles, how the stomach feels, how the jaw tight, all the stuff that you all know about. But he then, after learning all of that, he wanted to know psychologically what it felt like, the sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness, the sense of frustration. The fact that, of course, contrary to the folk myth, we are not really feeble-minded. You see, we can think as fast, if not faster, than most people. We just have some problems articulating it. So I was really able to once again think about this. And so now we come to the second part of my journey through stuttering, which was trying to make some sense out of what the journey of getting fluency had been all about. And I started thinking back, and I thought, all right, what happened in that very difficult third year of my life? And I understood that the common theme there was that my opinion was not being asked. I was not being heard. I was screaming out, if not actually, certainly internally, where has Adelaide gone? Why am I on a boat? What's happening? And I wasn't getting any answers, and therefore I was doubting the fact that I actually had a voice. Now, this is just my case. It may be different for many people, but that's the way I thought about that experience. The cop story in Seacliff. I realized that this was a thread that ran throughout my life. If you are born with two conflicting elements to your personality, on one hand you're a real ham bone and you want attention, and on the other hand you're a stutterer and can't get it verbally, you're in a bit of a conundrum. And I think that explains why so many stutterers become writers, or why so many writers are indeed stutterers, going all the way back to Aesop, and you have some very, very famous people, Somerset Maugham. I thought that's kind of interesting. I thought about therapy, and the good therapy and bad therapy. I've got to say that I think the type of speech therapy that's going on in this country has improved considerably. And it is not just mechanics. I found, again, I'm just speaking a survey of one here, mechanics certainly did not give me any degree of fluency, but once I had a degree of fluency, the mechanics, the exercises became extremely valuable tools. I'm still a stutterer today. I don't know how many of you hear it, whether your ears are finely attuned enough, but I'm stuttering fairly often, except I know when it's coming. And without even thinking, I'm so used to using these techniques that I take the breath, or I use the slide, or all the stuff that you've been taught. And then the act of defiance when I was 16. What was that all about? I mean, There are so many theories now as to what causes stuttering. Is it DNA? Is it hereditary? Well, there's no question that it does run in some families. One of my uncles was a stutterer. My grandfather was a stutterer. We know this for a fact. Is it neurological? Well, it may or may not be, but then how does one explain the sudden improvement that I had and that other people have had? I'm not the only one. I've heard this story many, many times. Did our chromosomes suddenly change in 2 weeks? Did our synapses suddenly change? How do these things happen? And in a certain sense, I came to the conclusion that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I recall years ago there was a period when I lived in the South Pacific, and I became fascinated, even obsessed, with the question of where did the Polynesians come from? And there are many theories, and probably most of the theories are right, and there was a combination, but I became absolutely obsessed with this. And there was a period when I was in Tonga, the Kingdom of Tonga, and there was a Maori from New Zealand there who I became friendly with. And I would talk to him incessantly and ask him questions. Finally, one night, he'd really had enough of this. He said, "David," he said, "mate, I don't care where we came from. All I'm interested is where we're going." And so it is with stuttering, I think. It's somewhat like eels. You know, eels are wonderfully mysterious creatures. Nobody knows actually how they breed or where it has never been seen in all the hundreds and thousands of years that man has been fishing for eels and eating eels. No one has ever seen it, yet obviously it takes place. Who cares? Then I started to think, what are the gifts that I've received? And I instantly recalled that one of the gifts I have received from stuttering was the ability to know a little bit about what not to do. Both of my children, and they're from 2 different mothers, both absolutely on schedule, about 3.5, began to stutter a little bit, and I knew what not to do, and I knew that the best thing I could do was to simply listen. Without any frantic look in my eyes, without any impatience, without any twitching my hands, just listen. And it went away. May I say that if it doesn't go away, getting good therapeutic help is really advisable. There are things that sustain one throughout life. One of the things that sustained me early on in my life was in my South Pacific Fiji days, I had decided for some obscure reason to be the first person in modern times to sail a Fijian outrigger canoe. These things are about 36 feet long. They're big canoes. And they used to sail from island group to island group majestically, but the British had put them out of business, had made it illegal because they wanted to force the locals into a cash economy. But I discovered that there was a very remote island in the south part of Fiji that still had and made these and used these canoes. So I went down there and I rented a canoe, you know, Hertz rent a canoe. Actually, it was 3 days of wonderful negotiations of how many arm lengths of printed cloth and how many lengths of rope tobacco and how many files for sharpening machetes. But anyway, to make a long story short, I actually succeeded with my Fijian crew of sailing the length of Fiji in an outrigger canoe. And this sustained me for many years. When I got into very tough times, I thought, hey, I'm the man who sailed the Fiji group. I can do anything. Until ultimately I realized, no, actually, that wasn't something to rely upon. I had just been extremely lucky. A bit later, well, more recently, which was the trigger for writing the King's Speech, I was diagnosed with what at the time appeared to be an extremely aggressive form of cancer. May I say, that was 6 years ago. I'm in total remission. I'm a poster boy for, you've got to find something else to die of, says my doctor. So I'll find something. But at the time, it was quite a shocking experience. And it left me with a huge gift, that it was a wake-up call, and that it taught me to live every day to the fullest, or as full as I could make it, and to live in the moment. And now came the King's Speech, the film, and the moment came in Toronto. We had a sense that the film might be well received at the film festival in Telluride, but the audiences were very small, and they're a somewhat elite group of film buffs. Toronto was 2,000 people in a huge, huge hall. I was up in the first row of the balcony with Tom Hooper and Colin Firth and Jeffrey Rush, Helena Bonham Carter, and people started applauding at the end of the King's Speech. The movie wasn't over yet, and they were applauding. And then when it was finally over, 2,000 people just rose and applauded, and it hit me. I'll probably tear up again just remembering it. I thought, for the first time in my life, my voice has really been heard. And I just started weeping. Tears were coming down, mucus. Oh, it was a terrible mess. And they put the spotlights on us. But that was a moment when I really knew, yeah, it could be done. It could be done. Interestingly enough, shortly after, I was besieged with interviews, and life was very, very fraught. Finding time was impossible, and I had an important meeting coming up with Robert Downey Jr., as a matter of fact. And I had not been able to prepare for this meeting and look at my notes. And I finally cleared 45 minutes before having to get into the car to go to this meeting, and the phone rang. And like an idiot, I picked it up. And this voice says, "Hi, this is Joe Biden." And I said, "Come on, don't F word with me. Who is this?" I thought it was one of my friends being a jerk, you see. And this voice says, "This is Joseph Biden, the Vice President of the United States." And I realized, oh, I have heard that voice before. And it was Joe Biden, and a very charming and intelligent man who really can talk. I couldn't get him off the phone for 45 minutes. But he said two things. He said a lot of things that should and will remain private. But he said two things that I would like to share with you. He had obviously thought about this issue a great deal. He said, "You realize, David, stuttering is the only disability that it's still, in the public mind, okay to tease about. You know, we don't tease people with white canes. We don't tease people with a limb missing. We don't tease people who can't hear. But if you stutter, out come the Porky Pig stories." And I thought, yeah, that's really sadly true. He also, very movingly, shared his sense of guilt that when he got a handle on his stutter, that he really went into the closet. I mean, I've admitted that I just didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want anyone to know, because he felt it would harm his political career. That the old folk myth of if you stutter, you're kind of slow, kind of feeble-minded, would ruin his chances in politics. And it was only recently that he's sort of come out of the closet and is willing to talk about it, and he felt badly, and I was extremely moved by that. When you win an Academy Award, all sorts of strange things happen. people come out of the woodwork, old girlfriends. Oh, David, I've always adored you. Then why didn't you answer my phone calls? But old high school friends contacted me, and what I found so interesting, and which I think you will find encouraging, is that most of them said, gee, I don't even remember that you stuttered that much. Yeah, you were kind of a little nervous, but I don't remember that you were. That isn't what they remembered. And I thought, I could hardly believe that. It was stunning to me. So finally, I came to the conclusion that these are huge and wonderful gifts, and that what you do as a stutterer can also be a gift. And I'll give you one example. A couple of years ago, I was foolish enough to go to my 50th high school reunion. This is quite an experience. It was the only high school reunion that I'd ever been to. And a guy came up to me and he said, David, I want to shake your hands. I want to tell you I only came here to see you and to say thank you. And I was a little bit bewildered. I said, what, did I lend you $20 back then? He said, no, we were in remedial speech together. Do you remember? And I looked at his face, and yes, it slowly came back. I remembered the man. We had been in remedial speech together. And he said, you were a great example to me. And I thought he meant, it was because I had gotten a handle on it and I had auditioned for the school play and been in the school play. He said, no, not at all. That wasn't it at all. And I was quite mystified. He said, don't you remember, long before you got a handle on your stuttering, when your stuttering was really at its worst, you had decided to run for student council. And the rules of our high school were, anyone who ran for student office had to give a 5-minute campaign speech at the assembly of the entire school. And there were no exceptions. And so I had to give a speech. It was, of course, a very short 5-minute speech because it took a long time to say what I had to say. And he reminded me what I said. And it was this. I said, vote for me because it is so difficult for me to say something. If I do say something, I will have really thought about it. Okay? May I say I did not get elected. The state of American politics was the same then as it is now. But he said, that stayed with him. And he said, my stuttering didn't go away early on. It stayed with me through my early 20s, and I was in the Marines. And he said, one day I was shaving, and here I was. I looked at myself, and I said, there you are. You're a tough Marine. You're the terror of the world, and you're still worried about stuttering? And he said, I remembered you getting up and giving that speech, and I thought, darn it, if dumb old Seidler can be that brave, I can be too. And he said, it started to go away. Just something like that was enough of a trigger to give him confidence, and it started to go away. So I was incredibly moved and thankful for that. I also remember a college friend who said, I know I'm neurotic, but I don't want to cure my neuroses because that's who I am. And there was a degree of wisdom in that. And so all I would like to say in conclusion is that if you can live through a childhood of stuttering, you can live through just about anything. You are Damascus steel. You know, Damascus steel is heated and beaten, heated and beaten, heated and beaten, and it's the strongest steel in the world. You are all swords of Damascus steel. The greatest gift that I have received from stuttering is being a stutterer. And if I hadn't been a stutterer, I wouldn't have met you all. Thank you very much.
For over 50 years, the nonprofit Stuttering Foundation has been helping those who stutter. For more information and resources on stuttering, call the Stuttering Foundation toll-free at 1-800-992-9392. That's 1-800-992-9392. Or visit our website at www.stutteringhelp.org.